Hey everybody, what's up? OCD Mikey, Hi-Fi Guy here, and welcome to another edition of the Mikey Show. Thanks for joining. I appreciate all of your support. Absolutely, you guys have been great. I am going to go over parts today, parts of inside of gear, okay? And the reason why I think this is important to talk about is because there are so many people that talk about the capacitors is probably like the main thing that you hear. You know, they don't really talk about resistors. You know why? Because resistors don't have name brands on them unless they're Catic. And then you get a little C on them and you get gold legs. And, you're going to pay at least $5 per resistor for a Catic, maybe more. So there's a distinct difference in the way a PC board is made. And there's two main types, which is through hole and surface mount. Okay, so old school, that meant there was a PC board, it had a bunch of holes drilled in it, and you put resistors like with their little arms and capacitors with their little arms, and you put them through the holes, you'd flip the board upside down, and you'd solder those and snip off the legs, and then that's called through hole design, okay? The latest stuff is called surface mount, where you get these little teeny rectangles or squares of chips, basically, that get mounted directly to the surface, little solder pads there. They don't have arms that go out and go through. And they can be, it's for ease of like robot insertion, and they're much tighter tolerance, the surface mount components. A lot of people may say, well, and in hi-fi, because we're so old-fashioned with our vinyl and our tape and all our stuff is so old-fashioned, we're the ones that hang on to the old technology for the most part, is the audiophiles. And through-hole is old technology. Why people like it? People like it because it's easier to modify and it's easier to sometimes repair because you don't need specialized equipment like you do for surface mount to repair the resistors, to replace a resistor, let's say. Through hole, you just put an iron right on it and you got a tweezer and you can pull that thing off, use maybe a solder sucker that sucks the solder out, but and then you pull it out of the hole and put the new one in the hole. It's more rudimentary, it's easier to work with. The surface mount, you have to have tweezers, sometimes hot air is what they use because it's very susceptible to the heat, so you have to be careful not to burn the little pads that they're on and make them lift off the board and all that stuff. So surface mount is more delicate and it takes more of a specialist to repair a surface mount board, whereas through hole, it's just any TV repair guy can sling solder and repair through hole stuff. It's easy to change out capacitors and stuff for DIY guys when it's through hole. And I will tell you, I used to modify, okay? I had a company that I made my living modifying and pulling stuff out and putting new stuff in. So I'm speaking from experience. I was the guy that used to ask, what chip is it? And well, what resistors are in, what capacitors are in there, right? And when I opened up a piece and I saw through hole design, I saw an ability for me to mess with it, right? I saw I can pull these out of the holes and I can put some new better ones in there and make this piece sound better. Hyper-fast soft recovery diodes in the diode bridge. We would put non-magnetic, non-inductive Mills wire wound resistors instead of the Sandcast crappy resistors, the little white blocks that you get in there. We would replace all that stuff and we could actually eke some better performance out of something like a Jolita tube amp, where they would come with cheap parts and we could mod them and make them sound good. And for a while, I made a living modifying Jolita amplifiers, amongst other things that people would send to me. Next, when I owned an amplifier company, I watched my engineer. I would sit over his shoulder and watch how he made the Gerber files that's a file that you use, a computer file that shows how to make the circuit design for the board manufacturer. It shows all the little traces, and you can watch him move the traces and reposition them and fatten them up and do all the different things you could. It was pretty cool to watch how a circuit was made. And you would specify the holes and if it was plated through the hole and the solder pads, the solder mask, all this other stuff. It's quite involved, but I learned a lot from doing that. So while in some cases upgrading parts can make a unit sound better, usually that's reserved for cheap stuff that needs the upgrades, okay? And they make more of a difference. For instance, you look in like a Viola Labs or a Playback Design, some of the things I carry, or a TAD. Am I going to open up the TAD and look at try and see if I can put a better capacitor in the crossover? Abso-frickin-lutely not, okay? Am I going to look in Viola Labs or Playback Designs and try and find where I can change the capacitors or something like that? Absolutely not. No way. Not in a million years. Why is that? That's because the circuit design, the prowess of the circuit design, the layout of the design far supersedes the type of name brand of capacitors that you have in there. Now, so while you can improve a janky kind of a design that isn't up to snuff, you can improve it by putting in Gucci parts, we'll call them. Thanks, Don, for that little name there. But the Gucci parts can't make an amplifier, can't make a DAC. You can't look inside a DAC and tell by the capacitor brand if it's going to sound good or not. You can't tell by looking at an amp by the capacitor brand or by the if it's using op amps. That's like the silliest freaking thing in the world, is people tripping on op amps. And the funny part is the people that trip out on the parts inside don't know shit about audio design. They don't know how to design circuits. They're not, because people that do know how to design circuits understand it's about the circuit layout, not about the damn brand or type of chip that you use or if it's got op amps or not. Op amps are far more accurate than any discrete designs. Can discrete designs sound better? Sure. Why is that? Because they introduce distortions, and distortions sound good to us in many cases. So what I'm trying to say is, to get wrapped up in what type of capacitor does it have is absolute squirrel food. Or they can even ask things like, where is the crossover crossed over? I'm like, how are you even going to frickin' relate to that? How do you even know what it means? How do you know? You're asking me the crossover point. What does that tell you? Basically, it's mental masturbation, okay? It's people with time on their hands that are just want to stroke their brain and try and figure stuff out and tickle their amygdala, or whatever the hell that thing, amygdala, I don't even know. You know, that thing, your reptilian brain. They want to get in there with a rubber glove and some KY and go and tickle it, man, and try and, figure out, where's it crossed over? What kind of resistors does it use? Does it have a dual differential DAC configuration? Is it use chip or R2R? At some point, the buyer, the end user, got their head into the design process, which is the biggest mistake, one of the biggest stupid things that's ever happened in hi-fi. People think that because it has the capacitors, those name brand capacitors in there, and because it's got, 15 million caps, like they put, I've seen some DACs where they have seriously 300 capacitors in there, and you're like, oh my God, what a nightmare. Like, that is so many places for drift to happen, for things to not be matched, and each one is a single component. That's a point of potential failure. You're putting now 300 points of potential failure in there. You're now putting in 300 different points where it can drift in tolerance. They're 10% either way, or 5% if you're lucky. Some are 20%. And to make matters worse, they are bootlegging these parts. So these parts, in many ways, in many times, I've seen them fake capacitors that say WEMA that are not WEMA caps, okay? You can run date codes, you can run numbers, and you can figure out if they're fake or not. And I have found fake ones. I found fake Furatech on a Denafrips Terminator. The little IEC inlet, on the back said Furatech on it. Well, I have the ones that I bought from Japan direct. And I used a micrometer, and I checked the tolerances on the Japanese ones versus the ones that I got on the Chinese product, and they were different specification, different measurements, which indicates to me there's a high probability that those were bootleg knockoff Furatech parts. So you don't don't even know if you're getting the real actual thing in some of those pieces. So now, if you have a higher integrity brand, let's say Viola Labs, let's say Playback Designs, people say too, oh, you always talk about Viola Labs or Playback Designs, or Jeff Rowland is another one that I like. And yeah, there's a reason I always talk about them, because they're the highest integrity pieces that I've found in the marketplace. So they are my poster children for the best products out there. So you're damn right, I'm going to keep using my poster kids as an example. And I'll keep proving it and showing you the insides of these things and showing you the difference between the stuff that I choose and the stuff that your local dealer down the street's going to sell you, okay, in many times. And I'm generalizing, okay? Doesn't mean every dealer down the street. A lot of those guys are really good. They've got a lot of heart. A lot of them shouldn't be in the business, but, I digress. The bottom line is companies like Viola Labs or Playback Designs, they're not going to tout what brand capacitors they use, because it doesn't matter. Their design is good enough that it doesn't rely on name brand parts trying to swoon you into buying them and trying to rationalize their price. The design is what means everything. It's not the parts that go inside. Okay, so it's very, very non-important what parts go inside. It's non-important for you to know anything other than how does it sound, and does the amp match with my speakers, and does the DAC match with my amp, and to have somebody consult with you as to what you're after with your end result. The only thing you're going to hear about, like for instance Viola Labs, is choke input, okay? The choke input power supply. The choke input is like very, very few companies use choke input. It's hard to implement, and it is expensive. But it has certain benefits that are absolutely apparent. Playback Designs uses triple mono power supplies with triple mono rectifier bridges, okay? A lot of companies will use 3 separate toroids, but they'll all go into a same rectification stage, and they'll go into the same voltage regulation stage. Not with Playback Designs. They're triple mono. So there's a voltage regulation and rectification on every transformer dedicated to that side, to that left channel output, dedicated to the right channel output, and dedicated to the digital section. They use transformers that are wrapped in mu metal, whatever you want to call it. It's a nickel alloy that prevents, that absorbs and takes up magnetization, so that the emission, the electromagnetic radiation from that thing, is greatly reduced versus a standard toroid that you'd find in just about any other product. So they talk about that, and they just say mu metal encapsulated toroid. They don't tell you what brand it is or that it's made in Germany and it's special. They could do that, but they don't, because they don't need to. So realize that when a company's telling you what capacitors in there, that's a red flag. That is probably not a good sign. Now, sometimes you can know by what chip is inside a DAC. You can make a rough estimation. Okay, you can say, oh, the Cirrus Logic sounds like that. Normally, typically, we can say Burr Brown sounds a certain way. Like, I know that from experience. A Burr Brown chip has a very musical presentation. A Cirrus Logic, or what's that other one? The one that the 9038. They typically have more of a resolute analytical kind of a sonic to them. And so you can say typically that they might lean that way, and you can make a guess, but you cannot make a judgment call. Another thing is when people want to know about, does it use 1 DAC per channel, or does it use 2 DACs per channel in a differential configuration, which is a pretty cool way to do things. It's a trick. And I always thought in my mind, dual differential was the way to go with the chip DAC. You wanted to do it that way. But then I listened to 2 separate DACs, 2 of the favorite DACs that I've ever heard in my life, and some were, one was the Aesthetics Pandora, the other one was the Vermeer 2. Vermeer 2 is over 20 grand. Aesthetics Pandora, the one I listened to, was like 7,500. And both of them sounded at the top level of stuff I've heard, and both of them had a single DAC. Both channels were going into one single DAC. For people that know how to do circuit design, Jim White's company, the Vermeer guys, man, they know how to make it sound kick-ass using a single chip DAC. And you go, oh, delta sigma or sigma delta, whatever, it's gonna sound, horrible. Wrong. You don't know the circuit unless you know circuit design. And the bottom line is, for the end user, you got to freaking listen to it. Getting caught up in the parts is absolutely ridiculous. Listen to the frickin' thing, okay? And if you buy from guys like me, you get to listen to it for free, okay? You buy the damn thing, you listen to it. If it doesn't do what I tell you it's going to do, if it doesn't beat what you currently have, you get to send it back and you get all your money back. There is no restock fee, okay? I don't play that BS. What I do is I put my money where my mouth is, and I offer you 100% because I know through consulting with you if my DAC is going to beat what you have, because I probably heard your DAC. If I haven't, my customers have, and they've told me about it. So I know how to match stuff. You need to listen to stuff. That's all that matters. You look at the TAD, for example. People look at it, try and prejudge it without listening to it. Oh, it's $32,000 monitor. I can't believe it's so much money. Well, listen to the frickin' thing, man. I mean, if you sat down and listened here, your balls would be in your mouth. Okay, maybe that's crude. Your crow would be in your mouth. Okay, if you sat here and listened, crow, you'd be eating crow. You'd be eating it by the spoonful, because you're trying to judge something based on its cover, and you're trying to base it on what it looks like to you. Oh, it's only a 7-inch woofer. It's a 5 1/4, and but you know what? This thing kicks serious ass. So you can't tell from looking at the parts. You can't tell from looking at the cabinet if it's some design or whatever. You're clueless, okay? And you guys need to realize at some point to get all involved in what the parts are, it's a stroke job. You've got the rubber glove on, the KY, you're tickling the amygdala in your brain, and you're stroking your brain muscle, okay? If you like to do that, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, it's interesting to look at how things are built. I get that. Like, we looked inside gear. I did some videos. It's interesting to look at how they're built. We will do more of that. It's one of the favorite things that you guys love is when I show you the insides of gear and I point out the different things about the build quality. Here's an example of a circuit design that has integrity. This you can just tell by looking at this. This is very well laid out. This is not relying on capacitors or parts or whatever. It's relying on the ingenuity of the design, the genius of the design, the sheer technical prowess of these circuits. Nothing more. It's not trying to push capacitors. Here's an example of the exact opposite. Would be something like this, which is, you see the cheap design in front, laying in front. And then in the back, we've got these huge old Doolin capacitors. And so it's completely relying on the capacitors as the prowess of its design, which means nothing. You've just shoved some big, really well-made capacitors into a cheap-ass design. And, I'm sure all the guy talks about is how great his amp is and all about the capacitors and that changing his world. Where if he just went to this, it would change his world 10 times more, and it would make more sense. It would have more integrity. So, and granted, we're not taking into consideration cost here, right? Some people can't afford this. I get it, but I'm just trying to show you the differences in build quality and the differences in whether or not you're counting on parts or you're counting on circuit design to make your sale. And this Viola Labs Ultimate Sleeper brand. You get nothing on the outside. All it looks like is a regular front. But when you open this up, look at what's inside. This is where the rubber meets the road. So it's pretty epic. All right, back to the program. We will do more of that. But you can't tell anything from looking inside. You can just get an idea of how that company thinks, the methodology of how they think, how they're designing. It tells you a lot. I look into a component and it talks to me. I don't have to hear it. It's talking to me just when I look at the circuit design. I can tell how the wires are run. I can tell a lot just by looking at the build. I can tell, and I have a pretty damn good hunch if it's going to sound good or not. You know what? I used to do a modification when I had my mod company, and it was great. It had parts count and then with a circle and a line through it. And I used to do a mod where I would charge you $300 and I'd send you your CD player back with less parts. I didn't even put one part in it. I took parts out, okay? And I sent it back, and you paid me $400 to take, or $300 to take parts out and send you back a player with less parts. And I loved to feature that because, man, I remember other guys that were my competition back in the day, and they would just list all their parts count, and they thought that's what made it valuable. If I chock it full of squirrel food, we can sell it better. And I did the exact opposite. I said, you're getting negative parts and you're paying me. And people lined up for that modification because it sounded better. And so I have fun with stuff like that. As you know, I'm not the typical dude. I go exactly in the face of what the industry tells you. That's why I'm in the face of all the narrative of what's the best stuff, because I know better. And I find the stuff that is not at the local dealer down the street. And there's a reason for that, because stuff I carry needs, God damn, dude, tangent, Mikey, and focus. Focus. It's time to get focused. And I'm not focused. I think maybe I need to take some of my supplements, some of my nootropics. NAC. I take some NAC. See, look at this. I'm already off on another damn tangent. But I'm going to rein it back in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for joining. Parts don't mean anything. The circuit does. See you.